So there's another kind of set of questions around accessibility, and both in terms of how you handle, and I think you've spoken a little bit to it, but if you'd maybe add a little bit of detail around how you make certain types of info, in particular medical info, accessible to regular folks, and how do you deal with limited access to internet? Kind of, is that integral in some of the development of the content, or is that kind of you deal with the content and then you deal with accessibility issues? Like, how does that come up? Or does the content change based on accessibility issues?
So it's pretty separate. So I would say the content, nothing that I make or the other content makers make, we don't really think about, will this be able to be used from a technical standpoint? I do think about it from a standpoint of, if I talk about how many cases of lung cancer there are in the US, that someone in Uganda may not care. Or someone in Zimbabwe might say, well, that's not the leading cause out here. That doesn't have any pertinence to me. What about, worm diseases? And so there is a relevance issue there in terms of the videos themselves, especially around epidemiology. When you want to give a fact, it's simply not a fact, if it doesn't pertain to their country. So I try to make sure I put that into the video and say, look, in the US, we have this. In Canada, we see this. In terms of the other piece, with getting access in different areas, a lot of our partners have done that. In some ways, I would say better than us. So we partner with groups that are very good at getting access to information out there. So, for example, there's a van. They don't just do medical stuff. They do all sorts of content. And this van drives into kind of rural places. They essentially set up camp for a week, and they let kids kind of go at it on the videos, and then they leave, and they go to the next village, and they kind of circle around and hit 4 villages over 4 weeks and just keep circling. And that essentially is kind of a mobile school, where they're able to set up a bunch of computers, give them out, and those students can kind of work for that week, and then the other 3 weeks they're doing other things related to maybe what they learned. And this is one fantastic solution that we've seen, is that you can have a mobile station kind of teaching in places where they would never get it. Khan Academy Lite is another solution, basically having a slimmed down version. But those are technical solutions that aren't really related to the content itself.
Do you find that when folks are doing kind of that mobile piece, or in kind of smaller, more rural places or places where education already is kind of limited, do you find that kind of necessitates a different look at how you go about certain content or the selection of content?
It does, yeah, it does. One example is I was just talking to a colleague of mine around what's the next infection I'm going to hit after we finish the flu stuff. And we were trying to debate between HIV and TB. And you could make an argument for both sides. And we were trying to figure out, what made more logical sense, and we chose TB. And I think eventually HIV makes sense, but one reason we chose TB is that there's more standardization around TB. WHO has a certain guideline, and those meds are used pretty much everywhere. And HIV, it really depends on what part of the world in terms of what's first line, what's second line, in terms of what drugs you're using. So if I'm giving a big lecture on this drug and the side effects, people in South Africa are thinking, what is it? I've never even heard of this. So to really round out the HIV lecture, I've got to do like 30 or 40 videos on all the different medications so that people can find the one that's relevant for them. And rather than that, TB is like 4 meds, basically. And so it's just easier, and it's kind of lower-hanging fruit to go after TB, I think, for that reason. It's just more standardized. So sometimes decisions like that do play into what we choose, and that's exactly why we chose TB, actually.